What's happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas here live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I told you all throughout the week that I would be back behind the mic to dive in to John Bones Jones and Dominick Reyes. I'm really excited for this fight, as I said, even dating back to December, while previewing Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington and looking ahead, looking at the rest of the 2020 calendar in the UFC. Very, very pumped up for the 2020 calendar year. First 4 months in particular, January we were offered Conor McGregor versus Donald Cowboy Cerrone. February, here we are, John Jones, Dominick Reyes. Next March, you have Israel Adesanya as well as Yoel Romero taking place for the UFC middleweight crown. In April, keep your fingers crossed, folks, because we got Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson in April. And then onward and upward as we get closer to May. Hopefully we have some great fights throughout the rest of the year, I should say. I almost said season. For Conor, it's a season, I guess, from what he's saying, but we'll find out. January was good to us. Conor and Cerrone was great to us. That was a fun fight. It only lasted 40 seconds, but the build-up, the excitement was there. The build-up and excitement is not really there for this one as much as it was for the Conor McGregor fight. And I think that there are a lot of contributing factors to that, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But me being the avid, diehard MMA enthusiast, analyst, fan that I am, for me to really look ahead into this 2020 calendar year and to see how great these fights are for the first 4 months of the 2020 year. Not only do we have a great main event this Saturday night, we got a great co-main event for this Saturday night. UFC women's flyweight champion Valentina Shevchenko is taking on Katlyn Chookagian, who's actually from the Western New York area. She has some ties to the Western New York area, being that her husband is actually from Ransomville, which is right outside of Buffalo. So for those of you that don't know that, she's also taught some jiu-jitsu training sessions at WNY MMA, which is a local gym in Buffalo, New York. And obviously you guys know I'm a Buffalo guy. So I'll be rooting for her, hoping that she can really put out the best effort against Valentina Shevchenko. It's a tough task, a tall order, being that Shevchenko is a dynamic, versatile champion. But Chookagian, I think, will definitely show up. This is the biggest fight of her life. This is the fight that she's worked her tail off for and has worked towards for the better part of the last 4 or 5 years. So this is going to be a really interesting battle between these two ladies. As well on the card, you look at UFC 247, outside of the main event, outside of the co-main event, I see some fights on here that show some true potential. And a big name that sticks out to me, obviously, is Mirsad Bektic. He's a featherweight, 13-2, going against Dan Ige. That's going to be a very interesting fight because both guys obviously have 2 losses on their record. Both guys are looking to really stake their claim in the featherweight division. Opening the pay-per-view, you have a heavyweight fight between Derek the Black Beast Lewis and Ilir Latifi. Ilir Latifi moving up from 205 pounds, taking on a very big Derek Lewis. Obviously, Derek Lewis has weighed as much as 265 pounds, which is the heavyweight limit in the UFC heavyweight division. And Ilir Latifi has fought at light heavyweight for the last 4 or 5 years. So Ilir Latifi will be the smaller man in the octagon for that fight. Another fight that you can definitely circle on your card list would be Lauren Murphy versus Andrea Lee. That's an interesting women's flyweight fight as well. But outside of that, those 3 fights really, Juan Adams versus Justin Tafa, those are 2 Dana White Contender Series guys. Juan Adams, someone that trains out of the Jackson Wink gym as well as John Jones. So he'll be representing JW for this fight card as well. But in Houston, Texas, UFC 247 is big an event that you could find, for that month after the Super Bowl. I mean, after the NFL Super Bowl, the NFL's biggest game, you have John Jones competing inside the octagon. I think that's good business by the UFC, and it's great marketing strategy for the UFC to put an event on of this magnitude. And then next week, February 18th, on ESPN Plus, you have Corey Anderson versus Jan Blachowicz. If Corey Anderson can get through Jan, or if Jan can get through Corey in devastating fashion, I think that could be the next man in line to take on Jon Jones for the UFC light heavyweight title. That is if Jon Jones stays at the UFC 205-pound weight division. We'll talk about that. But here we are. We're 5 minutes into the show, giving you guys the intro, giving you guys some thoughts on the fights themselves on this fight card this Saturday night, February 8th, 2020, UFC 247 in Houston, Texas. And I have not provided you guys my thoughts on this fight. So let's get into it. And before we really dive into this fight, while we really dive into this fight, we have to let the world know who Dominick Reyes is. Dominick Reyes is undefeated. 12-0. In 2017, when he really burst out on the scene in the UFC, he had 2 finishes. One over Joaquin Christensen, which only lasted 29 seconds in the first round. A submission over Jeremy Kimball, which only lasted 3 minutes and 39 seconds into the first round. A TKO victory over Jared Cannonier, who is making his name in the UFC's middleweight division. And a decision win over the always durable, tough-out Ovince St. Preux. Then in 2019, he had 2 back-to-back victories that really put him in this spot. A decision win over Volkan Ozdemir and a knockout victory over Chris Weidman. And here we are. Here we are. Dominick Reyes taking on the biggest name in the game outside of Conor McGregor and Jon Jones. And he's given the UFC title shot. That is a really quick, meteoric rise. And even UFC President Dana White stated that he would have liked Dominick to take somewhat of a tune-up fight prior to this fight, but he just rose up the ranks so quickly that he really had to be given the shot. Really deserved the shot. Now, when I watch Dominick Reyes fight, I do see a guy that poses a threat. He is a worthy challenger. There are facets of his skill set that can pose a threat to Jon Jones. He has power in his left hand. He has power in his right hand. He has the ability to throw sneaky fast kicks. And more so, his ability to counter is really where I see Dominick Reyes shining within analyzing and watching and checking the tape, as Buffalo Bills coach Sean McDermott usually says. As I checked the tape on Dominick Reyes, I saw a guy that really can close the distance quickly with his power. But with Jon Jones, that's a completely different animal. With Jon Jones, closing the distance on Jon Jones is no easy task. Because Jon Jones throws these oblique kicks, throws these leg kicks that are straight on the knee. Dominick Reyes has to counter and move. Dominick Reyes has to allow Jon Jones to be first in this fight. If Dominick Reyes comes out, guns blazing, very offensive, Jon Jones will pick him apart. And in actuality, when you check the numbers of some of Jon Jones' best career performances, whether it's against Rashad Evans, whether it's against Lyoto Machida, whether it's against even the rematch with Alexander Gustafsson, or the 4th and 5th round of the first Alexander Gustafsson fight. When Jon Jones is allowed to analyze his opponent top to bottom, when his opponent tries to come at Jon Jones will counter in the most vicious, random way possible. And that's where I see Dominick Reyes maybe having some trouble. If Dominick Reyes lets Jon Jones come to him, Reyes has a real good shot at landing some hard punches. Whether that means winning or not, that remains to be seen. But you have one of the most knowledgeable faces in the game in Joe Rogan, the UFC, color commentator, coming out and saying that Dominick Reyes is the toughest and stiffest challenge that Jon Jones has ever faced. Now that says a lot, because Jon Jones has fought the who's who. He's fought Daniel Cormier twice. Daniel Cormier, one of the best to ever do it. He's fought Alexander Gustafsson. He's fought Rashad Evans. He's fought Lyoto Machida. He's fought Rampage Jackson. And when you look at the progression of the Jon Jones era, albeit Jones being the toughest opponent that he has ever faced himself, Rampage in his first title defense was against Quentin Rampage Jackson. That was when Rampage was essentially in his prime. That's a really pressure cooker situation right there. That's a situation that most young men would fold under. But Jon Jones showed up. Jon Jones rose to the occasion and showed truly why he was meant to be the reigning defending UFC light heavyweight champ. When I look at the striking stats within that fight, Jon Jones landed 74 out of 131 total strikes, 56%. Whereas Quentin Rampage Jackson was completely neutralized. 24 of 52 total strikes. He was only allowed to throw 52 strikes to Jon Jones and his 131. Almost triple the amount of strikes. But really the fight that stands out to me, if you were to ask me, what fight stands out to you, Ryan, as far as Jon Jones and his career and all the things that he has accomplished, what's the one fight that really stands out to me? To be quite honest with you, it was the fight where he won the title. He takes the fight on short notice. Rashad Evans gets hurt. Rashad and Shogun were supposed to go at it. Rashad hurts his knee. Shogun waiting for an opponent, waiting for the UFC to find him an opponent. Jon Jones coming off of a massive win over Vladimir Matyushenko back in 2010, is offered a fight on short notice against Shogun Rua. Not essentially short notice, but technically, I mean, he wasn't, they offered him the title shot, but it was random. He didn't expect it. He takes on Shogun and completely demolishes Shogun, leading up to a third-round TKO finish. The fight stats of that fight, Jon Jones landed 102 of 142 strikes. That's 71% of his total strikes. 3 out of 3 on the takedown attempts. He completely destroyed Shogun Rua on his way to winning the title. In the order of the Jon Jones title reign, he then takes on Quentin Rampage Jackson, his first title defense, back in September of 2011. 9 years ago. That's how long this guy has been a name. That's how long this guy has been a force inside the UFC light heavyweight division. So Dominick Reyes, good luck. This is as tough a task as any. No one knows that better than Dominick Reyes, but Dominick Reyes definitely is up to snuff and is ready for the challenge. Choking out Lyoto Machida, unconscious, with a standing guillotine in the second round in Toronto, was unlike anything I've ever seen. The build-up to the Rashad Evans fight was unlike anything I had ever seen up until that point. Rashad did last the full 5-minute rounds with Jon Jones, ultimately losing unanimous decision. That was in 2012, folks. 2012. We're in 2020. Jon Jones then was scheduled to fight Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson gets hurt. Chael Sonnen steps up and says, I'll take on Jon Jones. Jon Jones says, oh, no, you won't, not on short notice. Much to the dismay of UFC President Dana White. Then he takes on Vitor Belfort, Vitor Belfort is well known as one of the most deadly strikers in the game. Jon Jones outstrikes him 96-22. You move forward, then you get that Chael Sonnen fight. That fight ends in round 1 with Jon Jones landing 3 out of 6 takedown attempts. Jon Jones shot for a takedown on Chael Sonnen 6 times trying to Chael Sonnen, and doing it with success. Then you have the reports that John Jones outside the octagon, I almost said off the field, but outside the octagon, was not doing what he needed to be doing. Let's just say that. Jones takes on Alexander Gustafsson. That fight's a war. It's a back-and-forth battle, one of the greatest fights in UFC history. A fight that I thought Gustafsson actually won, but Jones gets the decision with a raucous performance in the 4th and 5th round to rally and win that fight on the judges' scorecards. Rather than taking the Gustafsson rematch right away, John Jones then decides to fight Glover Teixeira. Beats him via decision, outstriking him 158-65. Then the fight with his greatest rival, Daniel Cormier, 126-78 in terms of total strikes. The build-up to that fight was palpable. The tension was thick. You could cut it with a knife. And then you have Ovince St. Preux 1 year and 4 months later, due to the fact that Jones had ran into some dust-ups outside the octagon, was stripped of that title. Daniel Cormier wins it off of Anthony Rumble Johnson in a vacated title fight. Jones then fights Daniel Cormier 2 years later in July and wins that fight via TKO stoppage in the 3rd round, but the fight is then later overturned as John Jones is then stripped of his UFC light heavyweight title, and Daniel Cormier is regifted the UFC light heavyweight title. Once Daniel Cormier moves up to heavyweight to take on Stipe and wins, the UFC then strips Daniel Cormier and puts John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson the rematch finally. After 5 years, finally the rematch that we'd all been waiting for. And John Jones ends it in 2 rounds in the Forum. I expected fireworks for that fight, but that result allowed John Jones to have a quick turnaround in March, taking on Anthony Lionheart Smith, who John Jones completely destroyed on the feet. 238 strikes to Anthony Smith's 45. John Jones, via the numbers against Thiago Santos, though, his output was a little bit weaker. His output was a little bit shorter. And that is the key in this fight. Which John Jones are we going to get? Are we going to get the John Jones that we saw against Anthony Lionheart Smith? Or are we going to get the John Jones that we saw against Thiago the Sledgehammer Santos? John Jones has to be active. John Jones has to be that pinpoint striker that we all know he can be. I know what John Jones has in his arsenal and how he can win this fight. I've seen him do it as I went through the timeline there, and for this very same reason. I went through the timeline there because I want to paint the picture of just how dominant this guy's been and how he's been dominant. Dominick Reyes, on the other hand, this guy has knocked people out left and right. Can John Jones neutralize that? Can John Jones shut that down? Can John Jones have a John Jones performance? Or is the game catching up to John Jones a little bit? Even John Jones, his very own head coach, Greg Jackson, went as far as to say that the game is starting to catch up a little bit. These challengers, these last few challengers, Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos, and Dominick Reyes, these guys are tough guys, and John is just mowing through them. But when are one of these guys going to be John Jones' equal? When are one of these guys going to step up and take on John Jones and take him down and beat him? Is Dominick Reyes that guy? Dana White, who obviously makes the fights, the boss, the president of the UFC, he seems to feel that Dominick Reyes could be the guy. And it's not that I don't feel like Dominick Reyes could be the guy. I definitely do feel like it's possible. But I've told myself that before. I've told myself that with Alexander Gustafsson. I told myself that with Rashad Evans, Lyoto Machida. I told myself that with Thiago Santos. And John Jones just continues to prove me wrong each and every time. And it's not that I doubt John Jones and his skill set. I just respect the challengers that John Jones has faced that much. Hell, even Chael thought, he took Anderson down at will. John Jones got some skinny legs. You never know. You never know with this sport of mixed martial arts. You never know. And that's what makes MMA so much greater than any other sport. It is so unpredictable. If Dominick Reyes were to pull this off and pull out the upset and win this fight, cashing in, boy, that would be nice. I don't know what the odds are right now, but I would only assume that Reyes is a massive underdog heading into this fight. More people place some bets on Reyes, the more that'll change. But even so, he has to be a massive underdog, one of the biggest underdogs in any fight in UFC history. And when you look at the skill set, when you look at what this guy has done in a short window of time, I took you through Dominick Reyes' timeline. That only spans about 2.5 years. And here he is, fighting for a UFC light heavyweight title. And he wasn't rushed. He fought who he needed to fight, and he beat who he needed to beat. I can't stand that. I can't stand when fight fans say, this guy got rushed to the top. He fought who he needed to fight. He knocked out the majority of his opponents in devastating fashion. Why is that not good enough? Well, it might not be good enough when you're facing a fighter that's as talented as John Jones is, arguably the best of all time. When it's all said and done, when the record books are opened, you'll see John Jones atop pretty much every record inside the UFC octagon. Title fight wins, title defenses. And that is with the trials and tribulations that he has faced. And I really don't want to get into that anymore. Not that I'm over it. I'm not over it. I don't like the things that John Jones has done as much as anyone. I don't respect those things at all. But he is here. He has not put himself in a bad situation in a little while. And I hope that continues. I hope that this guy can keep his name out of the headlines, keep his name out of the headlines for the wrong reasons, and put his name in the headlines for the right reasons. Look, folks, this guy has a massive platform to do some really special things. He is a young African-American male, pretty decent-looking guy, bright smile, really charismatic, good people person, from what I have seen. This guy has the ability to be the Kobe Bryant of MMA, and I say that not loosely due to the circumstances of Kobe Bryant's tragic passing, but understanding how big a figure Kobe Bryant was in the world of the NBA and how big a figure John Jones could be in the world of MMA. If he used the right platform, if he made the right decisions, if he went down a path that was redeeming, dignifying, rewarding, like Kobe Bryant did. Not everybody always loved Kobe Bryant, but they sure learned how to. They sure couldn't deny him. He changed the narrative, his entire name, his brand, his career, with positive actions, time and time again. John Jones, there's no telling that John Jones couldn't do the same thing. I don't want to hear that. John Jones has a lot of time to redeem himself. Guy is still 31, 32 years old. He's young in this game. He's got probably 5, 6, 7 years left of fighting if he's winning fights like he has as of late. And he also has a lot of goals that I think will play themselves out as long as he's winning. And some of those goals relate to Jones moving up a weight class, moving up to the heavyweight division. If he gets past Dominick Reyes, will he move up and take on Stipe for the world heavyweight title? I would love to see it. But that heavyweight division is murky. That's a murky situation up there. You have Stipe, who had an eye injury due to the fact that DC continuously poked him in the eye in their second fight. And I think largely that might be the reason why he doesn't want to fight DC again. And I would understand that. But Jones, in and of itself, back to Jones, he could definitely beat Stipe and be a 2-division champ. But I honestly feel like Jon Jones just loves that 205 belt too much. He wants to really cement himself in stone as the greatest fighter, not just of all time, but the greatest light heavyweight of all time. He already is considered as such by many. Is Dominick Reyes just another footnote in the career of Jon Jones, or is Dominick Reyes going to prove everything that he's said? Dominick Reyes has talked an extremely big game leading up to this fight. Some of it I can respect, and some of it I can say to myself, a little bit too soon, buddy. You got to go out there and win it. If I were going up against Jon Jones, I wouldn't bow to Jon Jones. I wouldn't, erect a statue in his likeness and bow to it each evening. But I would be respectful and know my role as the challenger going up against a champion that has defended his belt up-teen amount of times. I wouldn't go in there saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to destroy Jon Jones. Obviously, that puts fans in the seats, and that put eyes on the event, gets people to buy the pay-per-view. But really, once you do that and you lose, you only remember it as a jokester. You only remember it as, remember when he said he'd do this and he didn't do it? Don't be that guy. Be the guy that's quiet, calm, cool, collected, calculated, and make something happen. That's the guy that I think is going to beat Jon Jones. Not the guy that gets into a verbal sparring match with Jon Jones, but the guy that's quiet, keeps to himself, and just maintains his focus. As far as predicting this fight, I do see Jon Jones winning it, but I don't think it will be easy. I think this fight has the potential to be a war, with Jon Jones winning it via TKO or submission stoppage in the 4th or 5th round. Dominick Reyes has fought only in a 2-year span. He's knocked out. He's finished a lot of fighters. He's going to have to be on his A game for this fight. This is the biggest fight of his life. He should be in the best shape of his life. And I expect him to come out swinging hard. But with Jones still reigning and still winning and retaining his UFC light heavyweight belt. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. To follow the show, feel free to get onto Twitter. Type in Ryan Thomas Take. You'll see my Twitter there. Hit the follow button. All things NFL, MMA, MLB, NHL. As well, follow me on Instagram. I'm very, very active with my story on Instagram. I love going on, ranting about sports topics, and posting it for all eyes to see. As well as video breakdowns, audio breakdowns, you name it. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can also like the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Facebook and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take. Take care and enjoy the fight. February 8th. Can't come soon enough.